Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Dr. Annie Brewster, who's here to share with us her new book, The Healing Power of Storytelling, using personal narrative to navigate illness, trauma, and loss. So can storytelling heal your life? Well, today's show is going to cover just that. So Dr. Annie Brewster is an assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, a practicing physician at Massachusetts General Hospital, a writer, and a storyteller. She's also a patient diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. She started recording patient narratives in 2010 and integrated her personal experiences with the research supporting the health benefits of narrative. And she founded Health Story Collaborative in 2013. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Annie Brewster.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I'm happy to be here.
What a joy it is to have you here and to talk about this book. What inspired you to write this?
Well, that's a big question. It's been a long journey and really beginning back in the early 2000s. And so that background is important to how I got to the book. The book is very much based on my personal story and then how I came to understand the healing power of storytelling. But it was really grounded in me and my lived experience as a patient. I was diagnosed with MS in 2001. So living with that and learning how to integrate that diagnosis into my life, and also my experience of being a doctor, and both seeing the healthcare system really from both of those angles showed me that really what is missing most is time for storytelling, time for quality listening to each other's stories within healthcare, which inspired me to start a nonprofit, Health Story Collaborative, and ultimately to write this book.
Well, we're so glad that you did it. I felt that this was a really powerful book. And the subtitle of your book is Using Personal Narrative to Navigate Illness, Trauma, and Loss. And so with that, why do our stories matter?
Well, there's a lot of research we could get into that I learned about after I sort of learned about it experientially. So I'll start with just sort of my own experience, both as someone who was telling my own story and then in helping other people tell their stories. And then we can talk more about the research if you want, which I learned subsequently. And I've been really lucky since I started my nonprofit in 2013 to work very closely with a psychologist, Dr. Jonathan Adler, who's an expert on the health benefits of storytelling. So he's taught me a lot. But really, I came to this with my own experience of first being a primary care doctor and feeling like the visits were too short, too many patients, didn't get a time to connect, wasn't able to be present with people the way that I wanted to be, wasn't really able to care for them. And I was really disheartened because that's not what had drawn me to medicine. I'd gone into it because I wanted to connect with people and really listen to their stories. That's what my primary interest had been, and be there for them in those moments. So I started percolating on what's wrong with this system and how can we fix it. And then sort of on a parallel track, I myself was diagnosed with MS. And I think that was probably the more powerful lesson for me of how challenging it is to integrate something that is a traumatic experience, like getting a medical diagnosis, other illness, loss into our lives. How do we make sense of it? It can be sort of a disruption in the story of our lives as we have known them. And we have to rejigger our stories in order to move forward. So for me, it's really about integration. And I learned that by gradually. I was very much in denial for a long time and kept my illness very private and was very ashamed and felt angry at myself for being flawed, all of that. But slowly starting to tell my own stories really showed me the power of what it is to look at our stories, edit them in a way, and then integrate this new part of ourselves into that story and then share it. And there's something about the sharing that for me was really powerful in that it helped really get rid of the shame that I was feeling to put it out there. and to share in community and to have responses. So there is a lot of science behind the health benefits of narrative, both for storytellers and for those who listen to stories. And I outline that science a lot in the book. Really, the programming that we offer at Health Story Collaborative, my nonprofit, is grounded in the research of our chief academic officer, Dr. Jonathan Adler, who studies the health benefits of narrative and really the mental health benefits. And so there, what we know is that why our stories matter is, not all stories are created equally when it comes to promoting well-being. It's not so much the events of our lives and what happens to us that determines our well-being. It's more how we make sense of what happens to us, the meaning we make in that is linked to our mental health. And so there are many themes, narrative themes, that show up in the research that are clearly linked to positive mental health. And there are many, but the ones that we focus on primarily are agency. So sort of like the degree that you're in control of your own story instead of being just batted around by fate. Communion, so connection with others, community. Redemption, so sort of like when we can find the silver linings in our story. Not that everything's redemptive, but to look for that. And then just coherence, just the process of like crafting a narrative and integrating a challenging aspect into our new story and putting together a coherent narrative, that's good for us. And then this other element called accommodative processing, which is really about meaning making, how we integrate a challenging event and have to change our story in order to make sense of it, which is hard because that's sort of digging into what's painful, but it's also very good for our mental health. So all of our work is sort of pulling for those themes as we help people craft their narratives.
Well, that's so impressive. And I would think, why don't you share with us a little bit, like if someone is going to go ahead and share their story, how that would actually change and maybe change their thought process about who they are.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, psychotherapy is really just that, right? We go in and we're telling our story, and we have a therapist there to help us sort of quote unquote edit that story, reframe it, think of it differently. So as we work with people to write their narratives, and I will say we've done it without writing too. There are people who have participated who aren't literate, and we just do it through talking. But to go through, we have a narrative guide with prompts that is sort of grounded in the research that helps people with these sort of turning point moments. And we prompt them with questions, and then we go through many rounds of edits where we're probing and asking questions to draw out these themes that I just mentioned to help people like identify where they already have those themes in their story and also develop those themes further. And so it is really just focusing in on our stories to that degree and having someone else help guide us through that process, or you can do it yourself with the prompts and trying to dig deeper. It inevitably reshapes our story. Our stories are never static, right? They're always changing. And to me, that's where the power lies. And there's hope in that there's some stability to our stories, but that we always are in control of how we decide to make meaning and what we choose to remember and how we choose to tell our stories. It's only going to be psychologically productive if it's grounded in the reality of our lives, but we do play a very active role in deciding how that unfolds. And so these turning point moments that can be traumatic are also an opportunity, I think, for us to reassess and rewrite our stories.
Yeah, what a great place we would come from if we're able to do that and really kind of rewrite our stories in a way that benefits us as opposed to maybe, looking at things in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard work. It's not easy. This is certainly not a panacea. It takes a lot of effort to dig into our stories. But I do think the prompts are important because it helps us in that reframing to explore some of the elements that might be more positive or help us find our strength rather than get stuck in sort of the challenge of it. Not to say that we're pushing for all positive, because part of the movement that's essential is digging into what's hard and processing it and moving through it.
Well, I'm sure that helps a lot of people being able to work through all that stuff. My goodness.
Well, I hope so.
So you talked about prompts. Is
Mhm.
that where people would start if they want to start, with their own healing power of storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, in the book, so we've had a program for years prior to the book called Healing Story Sessions. And that is, those are live storytelling events. And it's what I referenced before, where we have a narrative guide and work with people through drafts. And usually we're the editors of that, but someone could do it individually. So in the book, all the prompts are there. And really, as I mentioned, we talk about sort of illness, trauma, and loss as turning point moments in our lives. And we are sort of structuring our guide around that. So we talk about sort of the before self, and we ask a lot of probing questions about who you were then. And then we ask about sort of that moment of transition. And then we ask about the after self. And there are a lot of sort of specific questions under those categories. And then we are pulling for those themes with other specific questions. So it's all laid out there, and it is possible to do it yourself. Usually we say get a draft down and don't think too much about having it be perfect at the beginning, or even if you'll share it or not, just write it down, and then you can, following the prompts, and then you can go back and edit. I do think it's helpful if you can find a partner, someone who you trust, who's going to be supportive to help sort of nudge you along with those prompts and maybe ask deeper questions, help probe, or it could be done in a group setting. And then the question of whether or not to share it is really independent. But I do think there's an added element of healing that takes place when we share in community, if it's the right community, of course.
Well, I was just going to ask about that, how storytelling builds connections and how does that really impact our story?
Yeah, I mean, this is where I think the magic really lies, as I've seen it just in community. Since the pandemic, we haven't been able to do live events, but we've still been doing them on Zoom. But especially when you're in a live event and you have an audience and a storyteller, that exchange between the groups is really powerful. It sort of creates an openness by having someone stand up and share a very authentic and vulnerable story. It sort of gives everyone else permission in the room to be more authentic and vulnerable too. And that really opens everyone, and I think enhances dialogue. And the way I like to think about it, and it's true, is that our stories never exist in a vacuum. So it's very much a relational act. And so every time that I share my story, how my listeners respond to it is going to change that story that I'm telling going forward, maybe just slightly, but it's going to shift it a little. And then my story is going to change the listener's story a little. And it's this never ending dance of interaction where we are all living in this web of stories, and we are all evolving our stories together in a way. And that happens when we share in community.
As one of the things I really appreciate about your book, it talks about how we co-create our stories with other people. And isn't that the truth?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And yes, and I do mention in the book that, it's more complicated than just individual sharing stories, that we all do exist in the context of these broader cultural stories or dominant cultural narratives, which in the research are referred to as master narratives, that can constrain our stories. But the way that we can shift that cultural narrative is by individuals standing up and telling new stories. And then collectively over time, we can actually move the needle. And that's social change. And to me, that's also very powerful.
Where do you think people get stuck the most when they're writing their story?
That is a big question. I think sometimes getting started is really hard. I think sometimes people get stuck thinking, I don't really have a story to tell. I sort of have nothing to say. And I would push back on that and say, we all have something to say, something unique to say, something valuable and important to say. And once we dig into it a bit and allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we'll see how much power there is there, and that it's very vulnerable. So, and very powerful. So I think getting started can be really hard, feeling like we're worthy to share it for sure. And then just, I think you have to be in the right headspace to want to dig into it. As I said, it's not easy, it's hard work. So sometimes if something has just happened and you're too raw and you're not quite there yet, you might have to wait a little bit until you're in a better frame of mind. Sometimes a little bit of distance from an event will help us sort of look back and reflect and find the meaning. We don't necessarily find the meaning when we're in the midst of trauma. So I think timing is important.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Dr. Annie Brewster in regards to her book, The Healing Power of Storytelling. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Are you an actor, public speaker, or an executive telling your story over Zoom? Jean-Louis Rodrigue and Scott Weintraub's new book, Back to the Body, takes the process they use to coach top Hollywood talent like Margot Robbie, Jack Black, and Ke Huy Quan and makes it available to everyone. Using your body and its energy as a point of departure, your work will gain an enhanced level of performance and depth. Back to the Body, available on Amazon and wherever books are sold.
Every day, pets are surrendered and abandoned. For these helpless and hurting animals, Paws Humane Society acts as a voice for the voiceless, providing hope for a brighter future. You can make a difference in the life of a shelter pet. Become a humane hero today. Just $10 a month will provide much-needed food, shelter, medical care, and love. It takes a community. It takes heroes like you. Together we can. Together we will. Together we are Paws Humane. Visit pawshumane.org to be a hero in every animal story.
What if everything we think we know about addiction, depression, anxiety, and trauma is missing the one key element that will actually let you walk away from them for good? My name's Bob Gardner, founder of The Freedom Specialist and creator of a body-based approach that eliminates suffering and creates happiness, health, and well-being on autopilot. You can read all about it in my book, Built for Freedom, or start your own adventure toward lasting freedom at thefreedomspecialist.com.
If you want to stop divorce fast, you do not need to waste years in therapy. You do not need to work on yourself, and you do not even have to have your spouse on board. If your spouse wants out, if they're filing for divorce, separation, or having an affair, what you need is a proven process to turn your marriage around. Book a free breakthrough session with us at highthrivecoaching.com/apply.
Dr. Richard London, who has 25 years of experience being known as the Man of Steel with the Heart of Velvet, presents the Life Wellness System, The Road to Yes, a mentoring system that brings you to becoming a wellness heir. Imagine having wealth, wellness, love, peace, and spirituality in abundance and balance now. Visit doctorateoflife.com or call 720-213-8021 for a free 15-minute wellness evaluation.
The first thing you need to know about me is that I love my kids, but they are not my everything. They used to be, but that's when my entire life fell apart. In order to pick back up the pieces, I had to put the love I have for myself before everything else, including my kids. I'm Jessica Dennehy, and I own multiple businesses. I'm a best-selling author, and I have all the strategies that I've used to make my life what it is today. And I'm going to teach you how to do them in my new book, Selfish is a Superpower. So go get your copy today on Barnes & Noble or jessicadennehy.com.
Announcing a revolutionary tool for wellness. Scalar Light has the ability to enhance and harmonize your own bioenergies. With Scalar Light, you can get started in just minutes and begin feeling better the very next day. Scalar Light is a remote energy that gently and subtly works with your own body's bioenergies, increases pro-cellular wellness, and enhances your body's immunity.
Experience the benefits of Scalar Light. Try a complimentary 15-day experience at scalarlight.com.
In your hands lie ancestral patterns. These patterns shape how you think, what you struggle with, and experiences you love, your life pattern. We're going into the latest neuroscience of biological hand analysis, a realm beyond palmistry where science and the soul entwine. Hand analysis is the latest method to transform lifelong patterns. I am Master Hand Analyst Brent Bruning. Join us and visit thepowerinyourhands.com.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest, Dr. Annie Brewster, who's here sharing with us her new book, The Healing Power of Storytelling, using personal narrative to navigate illness, trauma, and loss. When people are suffering from shame, guilt, or other really intense emotions, does this make it very difficult for them to get to a place where they can start storytelling?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's where community comes in as well. I mean, I think even if you're not ready to share it publicly yet, I think, at least from my personal experience, little by little, I started to share more of my story with others. I started being very private about my illness. And the more I did that, the less shame I felt. And then actually putting it out there publicly, which is vulnerable, also, though, very powerful, because you feel sort of, at least I felt a big sigh of relief, like you're sort of stepping into yourself and saying, yeah, this is who I am, and I'm proud of it, and take it or leave it. Messy parts and all.
I love that. It's so authentic when we've got the messy parts because they're there.
Absolutely.
Well, and in your book, you talk about reclaiming the narrative. What does that mean?
Well, I think for me, it means that we have some control over how we decide to tell the story. And that for me, that's where the power lies. And I think of like Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl, who talks about that sort of like the last of the human freedoms, he calls it, is one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances. So we can't always control the events of our lives or what's going to happen to us, but we can always control how we're going to make sense of it and what our attitude in that moment is going to be. That's not to say that we always have to be perfect, and there are going to be low moments for sure. And that's normal and healthy. But ultimately, reclaiming our stories for me means, okay, how am I going to find meaning in this? How am I going to reframe this? How am I going to make sense of this in my life? And personally, for me, it was finding a way to say, okay, how can I use my experience as a patient and also as a provider who felt like the healthcare system was broken to help others who might be navigating challenging experiences. And so in trying to come to terms with my own illness, I was able to, through sharing my story, come to realize that my story was important, that it could help others. And so right there is agency, and there's redemption, and there's communion, and all those themes. And it's become my life's work and my purpose. And that's not to say that I don't have low moments. I do. But that to me is sort of reclaiming our stories. And, as a doctor, I'll say, like, I do see sometimes people who get stuck. And I don't say that in a judgmental way, but I say, I think that there has to be movement. So we can have a traumatic event, or we can have a diagnosis, and it can consume us, and become sort of, I do see patients sometimes who their disease becomes sort of the focal point of their life. Sometimes that's inevitable and required if you're in the middle of a serious illness that needs all of your attention. But how can we move through that? How can we keep moving so we don't get stuck in just thinking about ourselves as that this illness equals me? How can we integrate it and make it a part of us and keep alive the other parts of us, or even grow in positive ways from the experience?
Well, and that would definitely, I think, be one of the goals there, is to help people grow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so for me, as like a healthcare professional, this work with storytelling has really helped me feel like I can connect with my original purpose of why I wanted to go into the health profession, which is to help people in these moments of challenge move forward in a positive way with optimal health. And I think medicine as a whole is really not structured to do that. We're set up to sort of, as detectives, like take medical information and solve a problem, meaning come to a diagnosis and then come up with a plan and then done. And we don't really equip patients for what happens next. And, we sort of think, oh, the story's over. We have a plan, we have a diagnosis. And I never realized until I was a patient myself that really that moment is just the beginning of the story. And how do we move forward from there? And it's not easy. And I don't think medicine is set up to address that.
We have other people who have stories about us. How much does that influence our journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really can. And I think that's just sort of the journey of humanity, to find our inner strength and to care less about what other people are reflecting at us, and instead define what that's going to be. And that's part of the journey of reclaiming our stories, of sort of, okay, I might be sort of pigeonholed as this or identified as this. For me, maybe it's, someone sees me as just someone with MS and doesn't see the rest of me. By telling my story, I can break out of that and redefine myself, and put it out there. And that is where the power lies, I think. Not easy, though. But...
No, definitely not easy, but worth it.
Oh, yeah. I think it is worth it. And I think, I sort of always come back to sort of like, what's the alternative? We have to navigate with the circumstances in front of us. And here we are, and we have to choose how we're going to move forward. And again, that's not to say that there are not dominant cultural narratives that can constrain the way we tell our stories, or that there are circumstances that are so overpowering that we can't in that moment reframe things. But it's in the looking back and the reflection that we can do that. And I think it's in finding community that supports us in doing that. I do think that's an essential element of having people around us that can help us and hold us up in those moments.
Can this also help people who maybe just were diagnosed with, something that's fatal? Can it help them work through that?
100%. And we've done a lot of stories at Health Story Collaborative with people who are fatal. And in fact, one of our storytellers, a man named Michael Bischoff, who is in the book, he's featured in the book, and he had a glioblastoma, which is one of the most fatal brain tumors, average life expectancy of 18 months. And he became such a believer in this process that he actually joined our team at Health Story Collaborative. He's since passed away, unfortunately, but he was so amazing. He really believed in this and found tremendous healing in going through the process, so much so that he then wanted to become a part of it and help others to promote, to engage in storytelling work. And that became his life's mission. So I'd say that, we can define hope many different ways. We can define redemption many different ways. Some things are not redemptive, as I said, or not redeemable. You could think that with a terminal illness, but I still think there are redemptive threads. So maybe it's finding meaning that we never knew existed, or maybe it's healing relationships that have been hurt and speaking out and saying things that we've never said before, but wanted to say at the end of our lives. So there are ways to find healing even when cure is not possible.
Well, why don't you share Health Story Collaborative with us? What is that all about?
So we're pretty grassroots, small nonprofit based in Boston. And we are all about trying to create a forum for storytelling within healthcare, not necessarily within healthcare institutions, but around illness and healing. But we define illness very broadly as any imbalance in spiritual, psychological, or physical well-being. And we define healing as sort of moving towards balance and wholeness. So it's very broad when I say illness. And we create space for that, both by having online forums and then having live events around storytelling. And just making time and space and working with people to tell their stories. So it's pretty high touch. I mean, we work very closely with the participants and the live storytelling events in particular, and go through many revisions with them and then have live events. So those live events are our biggest program right now. We also have been doing a lot of work around the opioid epidemic, sharing stories of individuals who have navigated addiction or who've lost a loved one to overdose, using stories to decrease stigma, to sort of bring alive the human behind sort of the quote unquote addict, and show that these are human beings with real, full, complex lives, and to help the community understand that and hopefully decrease stigma. So we do a lot of work with storytelling in that arena, and share those for social change. And those are our sort of two big initiatives at the moment.
Well, my goodness, thank you for making that such a big initiative, because there are so many people suffering from that right now. And it's not something we can sweep under the rug and ignore.
Absolutely not. And what I like about that project is I work with a visual artist, and she does collage with them in these workshops, and I then take each person out and record stories. And then we have multimedia art exhibits in community where we have the art and the audio side by side. And again, there's stories of individuals who either are in recovery or who've lost a loved one to overdose. And we've done it with first responders around the opioid epidemic. But it's, to me, that that intersection between the personal and the political, or the personal and the social, to try to use these individual stories for individual healing, but also for positive social change.
You mentioned first responders. Do you get first responders that come in with secondary trauma from, witnessing these different things, and they're giving their stories as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so we've done workshops too, where we've had both individuals in recovery and first responders together, because what we had noticed is that there can be, because everyone is so strained and stressed, and many of the first responders have been out again and again to revive people who've overdosed again and again, and feel burned out and bitter. And the people who are in recovery feel, and that the first responders judge them and aren't supportive of them. So we brought this group together so that they could hear each other's stories and really touch that feeling, or the feelings that each of them have had on the different sides, and try to heal that dynamic, and really increase understanding between the groups for healing.
Oh, that's so important. My goodness. Well, Annie, where can our listeners connect with you, learn more about the healing power of storytelling, and be part of your community?
Well, our website is www.healthstorycollaborative.org, and you can link from there to all of our social media channels. And also you can contact us through the website. So we'd love to hear from people. I really, really believe that we need to create more forums for story exchange for the sake of healing around the world. So that's my mission.
Well, Annie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Annie. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Healing Power of Storytelling. The Healing Power of Storytelling is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere books are sold. And remember, support our indie bookstores. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.